the Iran question.
Iran's nuclear program presents many threats to the already fragile political situation in the Middle East and in the international community. Given the chance to fully develop their nuclear program, Iran could initiate nuclear warfare. An embargo against the purchase of Iranian oil by all member states of the United Nations would be an effective way to combat Iran's nuclear program. While Iran signed on to the Non-Proliferation Treaty in 1968, there are accusations that Iran is not fully participating in the program. This accusation is supported by an incident in which International Atomic Energy Agency, or IAEA, inspectors were denied access to a military base in Iran. This supports the skepticism about Iran's opaque nuclear program and the accusation that they are developing nuclear weapons. This embargo would be put into place until Iran guarantees a definite end to the enrichment of uranium for its nuclear program. The ways in which this embargo will work to curb Iran's intentions are as follows. First, the Iranian economy would be greatly affected, and this would be beneficial to the resolution because the loss of income from oil sales would greatly slow down Iran's nuclear program. This would make the research and enrichment process hard to fund and maintain. Economically speaking, there is substantial evidence showing that Iran's economy has already been negatively affected by the various embargoes placed on the country last year. The CIA reports that currency depreciation is over 20%. The Iranian government has been forced to cut spending, and the country's oil revenue has dropped significantly. Further embargoes are expected to exacerbate the situation, and this pressure will force Iran to slow its uranium enrichment by directly affecting the program's funding. Globally speaking, an embargo on Iran is a better option for the world economy than a nuclear-armed Iran would be. In October 2012, Bipartisan Policy Center research paper posited that oil prices could double as a result of Iran acquiring nuclear weapons. Second, and more importantly, the political instability within Iran would pose as a severe threat to the international community should Iran possess nuclear weapons. Ali Khamenei, the supreme leader who has almost absolute power, is openly anti-Israel and openly U.S. This influence, combined with the power of nuclear weapons, would pose a great threat of nuclear war. An article in the Atlantic Monthly presents evidence that there is a decline in public support for the nuclear program in Iran, and the threat of public unrest is plausible. The rule by a conservative government illuminates the threat of possible terrorist organizations such as Hezbollah and Hamas as well. There is also the fact that in the upcoming Iranian 2013 presidential elections, Iranian President Khamenei is supporting Saeed Jalili's campaign. Jalili's politics are similar to Khamenei's and mirror his in an anti-Western sentiment and is no room for negotiation approach. Therefore, any possibilities of rational and future negotiation would become significantly more challenging when combined with the threat of nuclear conflict. Finally, this embargo would serve as a definite and clear international effort and would serve as a foundational sanction against Iran. This embargo will apply the needed pressure to bring Iran to the negotiating table and will send a message conveying the unanimous decision by the international community to not support Iran's continuing to enrich uranium. Because of the unpredictable nature of these various elements, the time to put this embargo into effect is now. This opportunity will never come again if anyone waits to pass it, and it will be too late, and the situation in Iran with the international community will be harder to manage and more complex. Therefore, it is important to vote yes to pass this resolution because it is the safest and most logical solution. Thank you.
That was 4 minutes and 10 seconds.
Since their genesis, nuclear weapons have been a serious geopolitical concern. The production of this arm during the Cold War produced a world impact with nuclear arms at every turn. The non-proliferation that is putting an end to the acquisition of these arms is incredibly important to foster a more stable world. Because nuclear power is tied so closely to the creation of nuclear weapons, a multitude of organizations have been created in order to prohibit the illegal production of WMBs made with the same enriched uranium used for nuclear power. Iran has been a concern for many in this regard, as they have been attempting to stabilize their nuclear power program. The U.S. believes that they could conclusively stop Iran's nuclear program using economic warfare in the form of the sanction we discussed today. The UN shall place an embargo on the sale of oil by Iran to any member state until Iran conclusively guarantees an end to the enrichment of uranium. This sanction, if placed on Iran, would be devastating across the globe. The problems this sanction brings up can be divided into three categories. 1. Eliminating Iran from the global oil market would cause prices to skyrocket. 2. The humanitarian crisis in Iran would cause widespread human suffering. And 3. Justification for this illegitimate sanction is weak. Iran's enrichment of uranium is not a cause of concern for any logical party. Time and time again, Iran has proved to be a willing and cooperative member of the international community. Iran has allowed incredibly extensive inspection of its nuclear facilities with the IAEA, International Atomic Energy Agency, quote and saying, quote, today, there is no evidence that the nuclear material and activities were related to a nuclear weapons program, end quote. Even so, certain U.S. reports have captured the world community's attention, and they must be addressed. Studies published by the CIA and other intelligence agencies have proven again and again to be falsified and misconstrued in such a way as to garner response from the American Republic. The IAEA, International Atomic Energy Agency, has officially challenged the legitimacy of several reports, one of which was used by U.S. officials as a provocation to launch an invasion. This falsified declaration shows the bias, the bigotry, and the plain attitude of all the authors of these reports and those about them. This justification behind this sanction are not the only thing that must be called into question. The immediate economic ramification would be drastic. Sanctions placed on Iran in March 2012 caused a direct inflation of oil prices, an effect that reverberates around the world. Foreign investors were forced to divert their funds from the growing Iranian economy, further exacerbating the rising price of oil. Not only will there be a short-term economic consequence, but a long-term alienation of Iranians will certainly take place. A sanction of this scale would destroy a huge section of Iran's oil exporting economy, creating a wave of anti-American sentiment and a widespread humanitarian crisis. Anti-U.S. extremist groups in the country will certainly use this economic warfare to their advantage, perhaps using this action against Iran to garner more support and further lengthen the war of terror. Basic human rights of the Iranian people were not met when in 2010 sanctions denied food, medicine, and other humanitarian goods from entering the country. Due to almost 30 years of sanctions, Iran has suffered a high unemployment and foreign debt. Economic isolation does nothing to help the people of Iran. This resolution will do nothing but harm the geopolitical peace we have tried so hard to maintain. The ramification in this form of economic collapse and human suffering far outweigh any potential benefits of denying a country its right to self-determination. And that is why I urge you to vote against this resolution.
4 minutes and 51 seconds. We will now hear the rebuttals.
The first point that my opponent mentioned was the effect that this embargo would have on the oil prices and the global economy. However, if Iran obtained the nuclear device, this would have even more catastrophic effects on the global economy. according to Senator Charles Robb and General Charles Wald of the Bipartisan Policy Center, Iran obtaining a nuclear device could result in a 10 to 25% rise in oil prices, and if tensions remain high, it could go up to by as much as 50%. This would cause a rise in inflation and could cost as much as 10 million United States jobs, as well as lowering the United States GDP by $220 billion. You can imagine the effects that this would have on the global economy, not just America. My opponent also mentioned the potential humanitarian crisis that could result from this embargo. I'd like to stress that this would be a UN embargo, and therefore the United Nations would be in charge of preventing this crisis. They would have the power to take these sanctions should the need arise to prevent a humanitarian crisis, as well as provide aid to the Iranian citizens. Also, I would like to remind you of the destructive power of the nuclear weapon of mass destruction. Would that not also be a humanitarian crisis? Furthermore, my opponent mentioned that the Iranian nuclear program is supposed to be peaceful. However, the IAEA was not allowed to inspect all of the areas that they wished to suspect. In the February 2013 report, the IAEA stated that Iran has carried out activities that are relevant to the development of a nuclear device. There is a site in Khartoum, which would be used for testing high explosives, that the IAEA has many times asked to inspect, but Iran has denied that request. My opponent also mentioned the potential rise in extremism in Iran. However, yesterday, the BBC reported that tens of thousands of Iranians were in the street currently protesting Khamenei and calling for political reform. Should these embargoes be this embargo be put in place, the call for reform would surely be even greater. I would like to go back and address even more about the potential effects of Iran obtaining a nuclear device and what that would have on the economy. If Iran not only obtained a nuclear device, but used it in a nuclear exchange, oil prices could as much as double. Gasoline, which would cause gasoline prices to rise by $2.75 at the pump per gallon. The U.S. GDP would go down by $1.2 trillion, and 5 million people would be left out of work in the United States alone. I would also like to mention that while my opponents have clearly opposed this embargo, they have not presented a viable option for preventing Iran from obtaining a nuclear device. This would be extremely detrimental to the world economy and would greatly increase the stress with negotiations with Iran due to their rather hardliner and unwilling to negotiate leaders. Thank you.
4 minutes and 20 seconds.
Before I even address the points made by my opponent, I first want to ask the question about the legitimacy of these U.S. reports. Now, the U.S. Director of Central Intelligence, Robert Gates, in testimony before Congress in March 1992, claimed that Iran would not have nuclear capabilities by the year 2000. In November of the same year, a report was made by the same intelligence agency that said they would have nuclear weapons by the year 2000. Now, recently, they made a new report that says they would not have nuclear weapons by the year 2015. They simply can't make up their mind in regards to the Iranian nuclear program. Not only that, but on August 23rd, 2006, a staff report of the Intelligence Committee of the U.S. House of Representatives on Iran's nuclear program was so disingenuous that the IAEA went as far as to officially dispute the allegation against Iran, saying it was outrageous and dishonest, contained incorrect and misleading assertions. This is not the first time that the U.S. has lied to the public about WMDs. Rafik Alwan, nicknamed Curveball by the CIA, was used as the only justification for the invasion of Iraq in 2003. He was the only source that Iraq had any WMDs. The U.S. simply can't be trusted to make these decisions. Now, they referred to the Iranian intentions. Would they use a nuclear weapon? Do they want a nuclear weapon? But Iran has proved that they have no interest in obtaining a nuclear weapon. Here's some points that Iran has made. Iran has never attacked or threatened to use force on any UN member. Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, the supreme leader of Iran, not the president, Ahmadinejad, has rejected development, stockpiling, and the use of nuclear weapons on ideological grounds, saying it is a sin. Iran has provided guarantees it would never withdraw from the NPT, Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons. It has placed all its nuclear facilities under IAEA safeguards. Now, they said that IAEA was not allowed to access every facility. That is simply not true. The IAEA was allowed 2,000 days of scrutiny over every single facility related to Iranian nuclear weapons. And the IAEA has recently confirmed that, quote, to date, there is no evidence that nuclear material or activities were in any way related to a nuclear weapons program. A year later, it said again, all nuclear material in Iran has been accounted for, and therefore material is not diverted to prohibited activities. Now, looking at the global economy point, they seem to make the point that oil prices is somehow a good thing. Well, we all know that's certainly a horrible thing for the whole world. In early March 2012, when other sanctions were placed in Iran, oil spiked to $125 per barrel, and in which it reduced the Iranian exporting power from 2,500 barrels a day to only 1,500. The rial lost 40% of its value in that same month. Now, they said that the rial had 40% deflation, but actually it is inflated rapidly. It's now practically worthless even in Iran. U.S. officials have been quoted as saying that they want to make the rial useless outside of Iran. I can't imagine why they would do that, as Iran is a powerful player in the global economy. They also said that this would provide a basis for coalition building with other U.S. and UN member states. Now, in Russia and China, they are both the number one, or Russia's number one, China's number two importer of Iranian goods. That trying to create friction between Russia and China would not have any effects. For example, recently in Syria and Libya, we have not been able to reach any conclusive treaties with Russia in regards to their exporting of arms to Assad because of this problem. Eliminating Iran's government-controlled economy would create black market trade caused by these sanctions would spill into surrounding areas, Afghanistan, Iraq, further creating a drug trade in those areas. We're already dealing with drug trade in Afghanistan. Now, they said that what would happen if Iran gained a nuclear weapon, and how can we provide a better solution? Well, in March 2004, in July 2004, in August 2004, in July 2005, in September 2005, Iran provided different treaties that would provide international partnership in regards to the creation of nuclear power. They want international partnership, but no one has allowed them the opportunity to do so because of, frankly, racist ideology. Now, they said that the UN would provide aid to Iran. Well, in March 2010, there were earthquakes in northern Iran. Hundreds of people died, and the UN did not give any aid to any of those people. There was no medicine, there was no food, or no humanitarian goods because the UN provided nothing for those people. That simply shows there's no way that the UN could provide anything. Now, they brought up the point that the IAEA said there was a high explosive testing facility. That's referred to as HEU, high energy uranium. They found traces of it. The IAEA said that its findings, quote, support Iran's statement about the foreign origin of most of their HEU contamination, end quote. Iran does not have a nuclear weapon. It doesn't need one. Frankly, Iran has been training for asymmetrical warfare for years, and even if there were to be a war, they would not need a nuclear weapon because they already have conventional weapons.
4 minutes and 55 seconds. We now have time for some questions from the studio audience. And I'm sure you have some burning questions. I do. I wish I could ask, but I can't. So let's see. Okay, the first question is going to be here, and then let's see if we can get a couple more lined up behind Adam. Come on, you guys. You should be burning with questions. Incendiary things up here. Ready? Yeah. Okay, let's start with Adam. So Adam, for whom is your question?
To Liam.
To Liam?
How would this embargo, this proposed embargo, affect the global economy in terms of oil prices?
Well, I mentioned this in my rebuttal. I'm not entirely sure if I made it clear. While it would be detrimental to the economy, Iran obtaining a nuclear device would be even more detrimental. That was the quotes that I mentioned. James brought up, my friend James brought up. He said when I was talking about the increase in oil prices, that would be as a result of Iran obtaining a nuclear device. Should that happen, it would be even more detrimental than the effect of this embargo would be.
Response.
That point is simply irrelevant. There's no reason to believe that Iran wants to do nuclear, and it makes so much more sense as we already have evidence that sanctions in March of 2012 already caused increasing oil prices, while this idea of Iran taking a nuclear weapon is totally abstract and frankly has no justification.
Thank you. Another question. Yes, Griffin.
So I guess this to Liam. So you're saying that Iran getting a nuke is going to be bad for oil prices, they're going to go up. So is that because Iran is going to be threatening people with them, or they're going to be saying, like, you pay more for our oil, or we're going to bomb you? I mean, I just don't understand why those two are connected.
That would be as a result of perceived tension in the region of, or in the Middle East. When people perceive tension, the oil prices would go up with regard to supply and demand. They would see a potential for the supply to decrease drastically, and that would be the reason behind the rise of oil prices. And also, Iran could and has threatened the Strait of Hormuz, which is a strategic location for shipping much of the world's oil. That would be one of the reasons that.
Response.
Griffin, you're absolutely right. Rising tensions in the Middle East certainly would cause rising oil prices. 2003, recently in Afghanistan. Now, Liam mentioned the Strait of Hormuz, and it's interesting that you bring that up because on the 3rd of July in 1988, Iran Air Flight 655 was shot down by the U.S. Vincennes. 290 people were killed on board. So how are we supposed to ship oil through an area which the U.S. frequently shoots down civilian airliners, killing 66 children?
Another question. It's time for one more. We need a third question. Yes, Noah.
Unfortunately, it's bad that So, you mentioned that there is civil unrest in Iran against the current leadership. With the strong nuclear power developing, what will happen if a violent civilian overthrow occurred and the uranium and nuclear power fall into unhappy hands that are unhappy with the U.S. government for the embargo?
It's definitely a murky scenario. The first thing I want to say is I do believe that rise is highly plausible. A couple examples come from the Arab Spring. The reason that this embargo is so necessary is to prevent the creation of a nuclear device, so that if those uprisings did happen, the newfound power would not have nuclear devices and would not be nuclear power in such an unstable. These embargoes would slow down the process and Iran's nuclear program thus preventing them from happening.
Thank you. Response?
So, according to the recent International Atomic Agency reports, however, Iran's capacity to enrich uranium continues to expand, and Iran's stockpile of low-enriched uranium continue to grow. So this raises doubts about whether sanctions have had a significant effect on that aspect. Will they even work? Is oil an appropriate means of controlling something that's unrelated to it? It's also important that Iran's oil economy is government-controlled, mostly, and so an economic attack on Iran destabilizes their government. And why would we want to do that when the people of Iran want democracy and create more anti-United States sentiment when they're doing it? Thank you.
We might have time for one more quick question. I seen another hand over here. Was that yes? David.
This is for James. You mentioned that Khomeini said that he believes nuclear power or nuclear weapons is a sin. And I wanted you to expand on that. I'm curious, like, where the perspective of the Iranian government is on this issue. Like, are they at all open about the fact that the idea of them enriching nuclear?
Kennedy has said that nuclear production, distribution, and stockpiling is a sin. That simply just goes to show the whole opinion of the entire Iranian government. Ayatollah is the supreme leader of Iran, so a lot of things he says goes. The Iranians plainly don't want nuclear weapons. Even before there's proof of production of nuclear weapons, the U.S. is already launching sanctions against them. If they were ever to actually obtain one, it would simply exacerbate this further problem of economic sanctions, perhaps even invasion. Many saw that the U.S.'s inflation of the euro as a target for invasion and similar things that they're done.
Ayatollah Khamenei has said that it's a sin, but Iran's policy is based not on Islamic law, but on expediency. That means essentially that whatever is good at the time, they will use to their advantage. So there is a very good chance that in the future, Ayatollah Khamenei's position may change. It is a political move, not a political move.
Thank you. We will now move on to the closing statements. It will be a minimum of 2 minutes, a maximum of 3. I will hold the remaining time of 1 minute, which is a 2-minute question. Let me begin. Given Iran's hardline trend in political leadership and its position on the world stage as a known backer of terrorist organizations, it is clear the safest and most logical course of action is to approve the embargo in question. A UN-orchestrated embargo is a strong, organized framework for any necessary future sanctions. It is a peaceful, proactive step toward preventing both armed conflict and, in the worst-case scenario, full-scale nuclear war. In addition to slowing funding for Iran's uranium enrichment program, further embargoes have the potential to increase public discontent. And this, in turn, has the ability to destabilize and preoccupy the country's government. The economic and humanitarian repercussions of either a nuclear Iran or a potential nuclear Holocaust far outweigh those brought about by this embargo. And such a scenario would be doubly tragic, given how easily avoidable that situation is. The government of Iran has proven its unwillingness to negotiate with the international community time and time again, and this is unlikely to change without increased pressure to do so. Our opponents mentioned U.S. reports on the nuclear program and how they were generally falsified, but it is important to note that the International Atomic Energy Agency is affiliated with the UN. It is an international organization. In its most recent report, it stated that it was very credible that Iran is trying to create some sort of nuclear warhead. Its refusal to grant access to military testing installations is more than enough reason for concern. Khamenei's absolute power within Iran effectively means that the decision to use nuclear warheads lies in his hands alone. And as we have seen, it's clear that his opinion changes from time to time. The prospect of having such a man possessing such awesome power is a terrifying one. Additionally, the potential for militant Islamist organizations to acquire nuclear weapons is a grave threat to international security and could spark further conflict. It is important to note that a nuclear Iran is not only a possibility, it is a certainty. It is only a matter of time before the country has the capabilities to produce nuclear weapons of mass destruction, and evidence points towards this being an objective. It is clear that little good can come of inaction regarding Iran's nuclear program, and as such, we must ask ourselves, are we willing to take responsibility for the potentially catastrophic price of our action? It is important, therefore, that the international community take firm, organized steps towards ending Iran's uranium enrichment program before it's too late to stop it. For this reason, we ask you to vote for the embargo in question. Thank you. 2 minutes, 55 seconds.
Ladies and gentlemen, this resolution would only have an unfortunate impact on the world. You may fall into the mindset that Iran is or will become a nuclear threat, yet this assumption is false. Firstly, this resolution is a bad idea because Iran has no intent to manufacture nuclear weapons. They have signed and ratified international agreements, such as the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons, and they have guaranteed to not withdraw from that treaty. Furthermore, Iran allows inspection by the IAEA and participates in meetings concerning nuclear power. Secondly, this resolution is bad because it harms the international community. As Belinda mentioned, in March of last year, oil prices spiked due to increased oil exports from Iran from a sanction. The majority of Iran's oil is government controlled, and if the government cannot sell oil, oppressive factions within Iran turn to black market trading. Let's take a look at the geopolitical situation. Iran's economy would be damaged if this resolution passed, and therefore their government as well. A less stable government could lead to armed conflict. Iran has already stepped up its conventional arms production in the wake of U.S. threats. And if the Iranian economy were to fail because of these sanctions, they might lash out in an attempt to gain footing. Thirdly, this resolution harms the Iranian people. Iran is already suffering a 15.5% unemployment rate, with 18.7% of the country below the poverty line. The majority of Iran's economic undertakings are in the oil business. Wiping out these people's livelihood would lead to increased homelessness, joblessness, as well as starvation and the spread of disease. Sanctions in 2010 lowered the standard of living among Iran's public, reducing the availability of food, medicine, and other basic needs. The welfare of the Iranian people must be protected. This right was stated in the UN Charter. We cannot abide by it and then abuse the UN's powers out of fear. Consequences of this embargo far outweigh any positives that would be obtained through the destruction of a cooperative and progressive country, and that is why we should vote against this resolution. Thank you.
2 minutes, 45 seconds.